Hi, friends. It is Mary here. I am back with another Broken and Beloved sponsor, Priscilla, who has been a long-term friend and also just has a co-partner in a lot of different ways and has helped us with a lot of different things from different various roles that Priscilla has played with us. So I want to just introduce her to you. And then I also want to tell you a little bit about our story and how we met. So Priscilla and I met, was it 2018? I believe it was 2018. And we were at a fashion show that she was working at Gather on Broadway. And I remember her coming up to me and being like, "Hi, I need to introduce myself because I've seen your work and I don't care what I have to do." Well, that was the email that you sent me, I think. But you were just like introduction. And then the email, you were like, "I don't care what I have to do. I just want to follow you around, figure out what I want to do with my life," essentially. Great, come on over. So that's how Priscilla and I met. And then she came on board as a employee, then a contractor. We did a lot of like branding and video work is what we were training her up for. And then she grew and was on her own, like a little bird and flew away out of the nest of, at that time, Mary Breuer Photos, and is now doing her own thing, including this incredible podcast that she's launched because she started a podcast while she was still here. So this has always been in her blood. So we're here today to talk to Priscilla about her actual podcast, what she's talking about, what she's doing, and just get into the moves that she's making and how she's impacting our community to also live freely in their skin. So welcome to your interview here today with me, Priscilla.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I remember that. Asked Polly to connect us because she said hi to you, I think, there at the event. And I was like, "Do you know her?" Because it was the photo you had. The photos I saw, I was like, I love her work. And so I wanted to, beside the branding, obviously, like some behind the scenes video for Boudoir clients, which you still do. That was a cool part of what I got to be part of. So like people ask me, I did a boudoir shoot, not with you, I wish, in 2018. And then when I started working with you, well, I already had that, but then like to see it behind the scenes and working with clients and stuff was really powerful. Seeing the impact that it had on women and their body positivity, all of that, even just behind the scenes, created more body positivity for me. And really, once you see how many women struggle with it, it really not only normalizes it, but suddenly makes it in your mind, you're like, well, this is silly. Everyone struggles with this. This is nothing to be worried about.
Yeah, I love it. I don't think people realize how on the other end, how healing it is for us as the artist to watch their transformation and like be a witness to that, and how much that actually affects us too as the artist, and how much it actually builds confidence in us to see them transform. And right before our eyes, remember, they would come in and they would be like breaking out in hives and like, "Oh my gosh." And then they would leave like, "I'm gonna dump my boyfriend."
It's so powerful. And one of my favorite ones was a couple that we did where the guy was like, oh, why are we recording a video? We're not going to use that. Which I mean, it does. And initially, you're like, well, why are we recording a video? What are we recording a porno? You know what I mean? Why is this person here? But I loved how afterwards they bought the video and it was like, it just helped to convey the power of the photos, the work that you'd taken, like interspersing them. That was really special because I was like, oh, he thought it was weird. And then he was like, oh, I love it because like they're laughing together as a couple, stuff like that. And it can be as PG or as you want it to be. So
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be anything crazy. So
With some limits. I do have boundaries, y'all. I know it looks like I might not, but
you do.
I do have it in my contract. There are certain things that won't be happening here, but you're certainly welcome to finish that in the parking lot. So, anyways, that's not me. Oh, I love that. But Priscilla, you have been doing so much work on yourself. One thing that I will say about Priscilla is that she is consistently committed to her own health. And I think it's really important that women understand that taking that time to invest time, energy, money, all of it, you've made some really big investments in your health and have been discovering a lot about yourself. And I remember when you were working with me, how much you were struggling at the time. And you're like, I'm out get sick this easy and then this is happening. And you were just going through it. And it's really hard, to be in the workforce when you're constantly battling chronic illness and going through and trying to figure out what's going on. Doctors aren't listening to you. People keep using like, well, it's because you're fat. That's why. Everything's because you're fat. You're like, oh, actually, there's other things that are going on with my body, and how that all like correlates with a lot of our clients that come in are also people who struggle with chronic illness. So you have like, taken it to the 10th degree of like, I am my own science experiment and I am doing this research project that is Priscilla, and you have been living out loud and sharing your journey on your social media, and I've been following along, and to the point now where you're starting to, which is your podcast that you're doing, which is it's called Pass the Mic, or tell me
It's
the
called
name.
Hand Me the
Hand
Megaphone, just because I feel like you get to a point in your healthcare struggle journey where you're just like, I don't know who I'm going to scream at, but I'm going to scream at someone.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you don't scream at your doctor because it's socially ingrained to be respectful, but you really get home and you're like, I just want to scream because like I'm not heard. But then also making that to be a form of advocacy, because if you think that you're just like your body is weird and you're gaslit by the medical system, well, I don't know why this is going on with you, you're fat or whatever. You do just deal with it on your own, internalize it, and I just want women to be able to tell their stories of how they found healing, what's worked for them. And one of the big things is, I've had doctors come on my podcast and say, doctors aren't the experts. We as a society elevate them, go into the doctor's office, but like supposed to develop a partnership. And if it's not working, well, then move on. Get your doctor situation.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And you said, oh, so you've already released 10 episodes. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So she's already released 10 episodes on there. And then you had to take a little bit of a break because wouldn't you, chronic illness comes back around in a cycle and then you have to take care of it and deal with it and keep moving. It's not something that just like goes away. And I think that's the other thing is like sometimes I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like when you're dealing with chronic illness, like almost like flare ups or something like that, like where you have to like, battle through it and then things are kosher, but then it's like a layer and there's things underneath that. So you've got the 10 episodes. My question that I have for you is what has been your favorite? Tell me your favorite interview so far that if anybody was going to go to your podcast. Which episode are you like, gotta listen to this?
So I think my favorite episode right now would be the most recent release. I did it with Rachel Brown out of Minnesota, and she talks about the mother wound a lot because I might butcher it, but I think she's a midwife, a nurse, and a therapist. She has all three of those degrees and certifications. High achieving woman. And I think when you get to that point of being high achieving, but dealing with a chronic illness, or in this instance, the podcast focuses a lot on the mother wound, which is part of my story. It's hard sometimes to untangle trauma and like being, I don't want to say things being blamed on trauma because there's some mind body connection, but you're like, but I'm also having these very physical symptoms. And like, even if I've been in with doctors and they've told me like all in your head or whatever. So, like, personally, I thought that was a great podcast episode. It has a little different vibe than the rest of them because it just like us going off. Because we're like, yes, this is such an important issue. Whether you have a mother wound or a father wound, etc., and the impact on it on women's health. So that would be my favorite right now.
I love that. So tell people where they can go to see your podcast, to where can they listen, where can they watch your journey? Those two things. I think those are really important for people to know where to go.
So they can find me at Priska Elzen on Instagram. That's like a weird mesh of personal, the podcast, and my business. And then the podcast has its own at Hand Me the Megaphone podcast on Instagram, which at some point I'm going to put like stories of everyone's like ask people what their Hand Me the Megaphone moment is. And so like one thing that they'd yell into a microphone for other megaphone for other women to know. And then I'm going to create like a little reel series about those. And then you can find the website under podcast at priskaelzen.com. There will be all the show notes and stuff as well as layer for that. But you can also find the podcast on pretty much any streaming service that you have. Just search Hand Me the Megaphone podcast. I do want to say, because you brought up the struggles that I was having when I was working with you. So I was working in home health care kind of part time while I was working with you and was having immune issues. And that was in 2019 or 2020. I think I'd quit by 2020 working with the healthcare. So things got a little bit better. But I was always like really sensitive to being exposed to viruses and stuff, and always going to the doctors, spending so much money on NyQuil and just missed work and stuff like that. And it's been really good the last 2 years. I've had very few. My health has gotten better in that respect. But one of the things is finally I got the IgGs tested or something, and one of my IgAs is low, which is for the immune system. So finally, here in 2024, 5 years later, and that's not even like a decade prior, because I would constantly get sick. They're finally like, oh, well, you might have an issue. You were constantly getting sick. I'm like, well, it's kind of better, but yeah, so like, now I have enough of a history that they're going to like maybe treat it. And I'm like, this is why it shouldn't take that long. You shouldn't be
Yeah.
miserable that long.
Yeah. And this is like the biggest thing that I say to women and why I even started the Broken and Beloved Project in the first place was because in order to advocate for yourself, you need to know how to communicate boundaries. And boundaries are not just like they're not just stop this, don't do that, know this. That's not what boundaries are. It's also advocating like I desire this. This is a need, and a health is a need. Everyone needs their health in order to live and survive. And so it's not even just a desire or a want, but this is like a need. And so when we, as especially as women, don't have the words or the skill set or the confidence to be able to speak up, we're not going to get anywhere. We're going to just continue to be on this path. And just think, if you would have just been passively listening to whatever that they were saying to you, how many more years would you be dealing with these things? 5 years feels like a forever time, but just imagine how much more time would have been going on if you wouldn't have been able to start advocating for yourself like you have been these last 5 years.
So
It's insane.
the tricky thing with all of that is I think women are ingrained societally to not question it. So like, even though I may come off as advocate with your doctor, do all these things, like, I literally was really frustrated a couple months ago. I was sitting with some people at a table, and one of the women was like, "No, in the traditional medicine system, you have to be like, not like, can you give me a referral to this? Like, ask, hey, get me a referral for this YZ." And I was like, damn, you know what? But so the thing about it is part of it is education, because unless I'm sitting with other women talking about my health issues and finding someone who like maybe what they're telling me to go get a referral for, I'm going to go see that doctor, and that doctor's going to be like, yeah, well, that's not what you have. But then I've checked that off the box. I know
Yeah.
it's not that. And so, like, but you don't even know the terms. You don't know what doctors aren't being proactive. They're not telling, oh, let's test this, this, and this to see if something's going on. Even to test vitamin levels, you're going to have to ask for that. And so, because of that, we need education, or we're not going to get a medical degree, but we need to know, share communally, at least what are you going to do? What are tests you're having run? We need to share that information so that other people can be like, oh, well, maybe you know what? I have some of those symptoms. I should just go get that tested. And if it's not that. And we do have to play a guessing game because we're not doctors, and doctors don't know unless you get a really good one. And even then, they're not going to, like, we have to think, we have to research and then come back to our doctors with, hey, can we test for this if we're going through
Yeah.
chronic issues? Because when I started out with you, I didn't get diagnosed with PCOS until 2021. So like that's, I think, whether it's in a photography session or everyday life, like, people are coming with body image issues and they're saying, I don't know what's going on with me. A big part of my story is I gained 20 pounds a year for 9 years, which is 180 pounds. When that started happening, I weighed 150. I
Hmm.
doubled my weight. And doctors kept saying, oh, well, you used to be like a farm kid or whatever, and now you're like sitting at a desk or whatever, like less, move more. Like, so even like education too, there were some not great food choices for blood sugar balancing that happened during that time on my end in terms of responsibility. But with trauma and stuff, you don't know how to properly feed yourself. These are things we learn as we
Yeah.
go. We can't have guilt and shame over ourselves. That. And so when it was constantly being blamed, when about the time that I came to you, I'd come to a doctor at Aurora Baker who had said, why don't you track your food? Because they really thought I was emotionally eating. And so many
Hmm.
women are like, oh, I'm not saying you're not an emotional eater. Maybe something bad happens and I'm grabbing candy. You know that about yourself. That's good information. But for me, It wasn't. When I started tracking, I was like, oh, it's always like I'm eating salads or I'm way under eating, and then suddenly I'm binging a bag of donuts. So like I'm not a calorie counter that would be like triggering for me, but just like tracking what I was eating and seeing the patterns was able to break that. So by the time I had started working with you, I was not an emotional eater. I don't know what's going on with my health, but something is, but I don't know what. And it took me another
Yeah,
2 years. And I feel like for a lot of women, whether it's boudoir or affirmations or whatever you're doing for your body positivity, removing the shame, something's going on. Maybe it is some of the things you're doing, but maybe there's also another component. And so you could eat the strictest thing, but something else is going on in your body. So like not being hard on ourselves for those
yeah,
things.
100%. Oh, there's like I feel like we could talk for hours, go on it because we do whenever we're around. Yeah, we could go on and on and on, but this is why you need to go listen to Priscilla's podcast because if this conversation is just like, oh, this is my alley, this is my lane, or you're struggling yourself with a chronic health issue, I do too. I have an autoimmune disorder. I'm constantly battling it, constantly managing it. It just doesn't go away and it can get exhausting. So Priscilla is doing is very aligned with what we do for the Broken and Beloved Project and with our own community is creating that a community and a space for people to be able to share in community of what's going on. And you heard how important that was for her to have that key. It was just one phrase, just one word, not can I, it was I need. And it was just like a movement that changed her ability to be able to get some answers without having to lag for them or to open the door to uncertainty. It was a confident switch. And it's just incredible. But Priscilla, I want to ask you before we go, what inspired you or motivated you to become for us? Priscilla sponsored the Broken and Beloved Project for us this year by helping us with our premiere party, which is the celebration that we do at the end of the Broken and Beloved Project to help celebrate these women and honor these women who've gone through this 9 month journey. So Priscilla used her photography and videography skills for us. But I want to know your personal insight on what made you say yes to being a sponsor with us.
Yeah, so I think everything that we've talked about so far and knowing the impact that it has for women ties hand in hand with the work that I'm doing and my passion around women getting answers, feeling better in their bodies, like the whether it's through a photo session or through learning what questions you need to ask, knowledge, those all tie in. And so it makes sense to me that anyone who is part of the Broken and Beloved Project would also want to educate themselves on their health and just for whatever it's worth my podcast I try to alternate between people's personal stories and having doctors on the podcast. It's important to me that there is no shame on my podcast. And so I do believe that that makes it a safe podcast for anyone to go on. We are going to be releasing a podcast around an eating disorder. So like that's triggering for someone, then that's like upfront thing that just skip that podcast. Not a big deal. But it could be really helpful for anyone who wants to discuss that because it's a woman's story out of that. So
Yeah,
those are just some of the powerful things that are up and coming.
that's amazing. Priscilla, you're doing amazing work. I just have to say, from mentor to mentee, I'm so proud of you and everything that you have become and are becoming. It's been a wonderful journey to watch you blossom and grow in all these different areas and not just in the realm of art, but also in the realm of using your voice and seeing you become more and more powerful each day. It's beautiful. So thank you for doing that and letting me be a part of your journey. Also, wanted to just remind you guys that Priscilla's information is going to be, if you're watching this on YouTube, the extended interview here, that all of her information is going to be in the description so you can easily click it. But again, check her out on Instagram, Priska Elson. And then also you have the podcast on Instagram as well.
Yeah, it's Hammy the Megaphone.
On Instagram, good. So make sure you follow her because then you can watch her personal and then you can see the interviews and do both of them. But thank you so much for your time, for your talent, for your gift, and everything that you do here for the Green Bay community.
Thank you, Mary.